Questions and answers. Is there any way of judging when to take a case or have a person go to someone else? Answer. From the very moment that you take hold of a case, something begins to happen. Within 24 hours, you know, and the patient knows whether he feels something at work. If he doesn't, and he has any urge at all, let him go. Or if you yourself can see that within a day or two or three, there's a sign he would like to make a change, then encourage it. The wisest thing in the world is never to believe that a patient belongs to you. In other words, that you have a patient. No patient is mine beyond the call that he just this minute made. 5 minutes later, he's free to go to anybody else he wants with no feelings on any part. On my part. I don't believe that there's such a thing as a personal relationship between practitioner and patient. A person who may be a patient this minute and asks for help doesn't even have to come back and explain tomorrow that he wants another practitioner. He's not obligated to me one moment beyond the minute he asked for a treatment. After that, he's through. If he comes back the next day or that night or so, he's doing that of his own accord, and I have no hold on him and want none. Never. Sometimes I've had cases that don't seem to respond right away, but the patient says, I want you to go on with the work. Well, that's all right. You can be sure he's feeling something in there, or he would not want to be going on, or he would not want you to be going on with the work. It may not yet be the healing, but there is something there that makes the patient say, no, I want you. There's some bond. As long as he wants you, you keep right on. But at the first sign that you are not registering, that you are not getting there and he's realizing it, let him know he's released and free, and that he's not free. He's not to feel any attachment or anything else in the way of having to keep on with you. In this work, it's all by feel, nothing else. Question. How far do you go with patients if they want materia medica help or want to resort to medicine? Answer. That is a question that almost has to be answered by the case at the time. For instance, my background being what it is, I naturally have no belief that we should mix medicine and metaphysics. On the other hand, it's apparent that we are not meeting every situation. For instance, just see how many of us are wearing glasses, which is a resort to materia medica. The only reason we are doing this is to suffer it to be so now. It is probably better to wear glasses than it is to go around half blind until we make the demonstration. Even though we are wearing the glasses, we should not be satisfied to rest back in that. We should always be continuing to get ourselves free. In the same way, there are people who, in their initial stages of coming to metaphysics out of materia medica, maybe depending on digitalis or on something that, according to materia medicine, is keeping them alive. Or they may be taking sleeping powders, something of that kind. If they are youngsters in the work, my angle is not to bother them at all, but to do my work and to free them from it. But if I don't free them very quickly and I see they are going to keep clinging and clinging and clinging, then I let them go. Because I will not accept the fact that we can cooperate with materia medica, and I will not go on with such a case. Now, if a person comes along who, according to medical belief, has a cancer and it's getting worse or something of that kind, and something that means surgery or death, or where there may be a broken bone and they want it set, to my mind, it is far better to resort to their surgery and get it over with and get back on the path than to let themselves just die out saying, I'd rather die than have surgery. Every time you go back to materia medica, you are failing in your demonstration. Just as I said before, when I don't meet a case, I'm frank to acknowledge that I did not, in that particular case, rise high enough. No alibi about it. Jesus would have met it. That proves that anyone with the fullness of the Christ mind would have met it. Therefore, with me, it's just a question of admitting, well, I didn't rise high enough. I'm going to keep on in this work and try to do better next time. So if someone comes along and the fear is so great that he wants surgery, or as often happens, he or she may not want it, but has a wife or a husband or a mother or a son or a daughter who says, no, we're not going to let you take this risk. You've got to have medicine. Then stand by them. They need your help more than ever. If someone that you know in this work has made a failure of it and has to go to the hospital, stand by them. Your metaphysical work may pull them through where the hospital or the surgery won't. Do you see what I mean? Never let go of a person. Always remember this. Again, Jesus is my authority. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If you yourself got to the point where you just couldn't make the grade and felt you had to go to the hospital, would you really and truly want your practitioner to say, I won't give you any help? Of course you wouldn't. Well, suppose someone we know falls from grace and steals something and gets arrested. What are you going to do? Say, ho, ho, I'll have nothing to do with you. No, that's the time he needs you more than ever. Jesus said, when I was in prison, you comforted me. When I was sick, you came to me. That's when they need it the most, when they are in the deepest trouble. The only line I draw is where people become absolutely chronic materia medica. Then I just can't do it. If people are chronically taking sleeping powders, chronically taking carthritics and all this business, I just don't want it. They're not on this path. They're seeking only the loaves and fishes. Remember, again, they came over to Jesus. He had just fed them with the bread and the fishes, and they came across the next day looking again. He said, what are you looking for? Not the truth. You saw the miracle of the loaves and fishes, and you want some more of that. We are not here to cater to helping out people who want to try a little of both, who want the easy way. But those who are beginning, stand by and have patience with them until the demonstration comes of their freedom from those things. Or if any of us get into a jam like that, stick to us. After all, it isn't a crime or a horrible failure to fall down on one of these demonstrations. It's just one of those things that happen. What we are here to do is start over again. Lots of us get left back in a grade and have to repeat this work. That's what happens right here. We go along and think we're making marvelous demonstrations, getting to the top as metaphysicians. Then all of a sudden, something comes along and there are our clay feet. Right then is when we need our metaphysical friends the most. So that's my attitude. Don't cater to the medical thought and don't string along with people who are trying to benefit continuously by both. But on the other hand, don't throw anyone out because he is failing in a demonstration. Rather, stand by, help him get back on his path. In other words, love is the principle of this work. Question, if God is mind, why is his activity not mental? Well, the question really is God mind? Well, consciousness? Answer, if you take consciousness, you are not taking a mental activity. The mental activity is reasoning activity and a thinking activity. Consciousness does not reason or think. It just becomes aware of. For instance, if I see you there, I'm not thinking, I'm not reasoning. I'm aware that you are there, and that's all. Now, 2 times 2 are 4. God, infinite consciousness, even what we call divine mind, doesn't think and doesn't have a mental process for arriving at it. It is just a state of is. 2 times 2 are 4. And now, mind does not make it so. There was no time when it was other than that. There was no time in creation when 2 times 2 became 4. Therefore, there's no process of making them 4, and therefore, there was no mental activity. The only mental activity was the one of awareness. 2 times 2 always existed as 4, but mental activity consisted of being aware of it. Do you follow that? When I said we're not working on the mental plane, what I meant was, is that the only activity of your mind is one of awareness? What I meant was, is that the only activity of your mind is one of awareness? We become aware that you are spiritual, that you are the divine being, that sin, disease, and death are illusions, just nothingness or mesmeric suggestion. But we do not go through any mental process to make it so. We don't indulge in any kind of mental process with the idea of making a sick man well, or a poor man rich, or an unemployed man employed. If we have any process, it is only the process of awareness. It is only the process of becoming aware of that which already divinely is. And I might add, it isn't a humanly mental process. You can't look at a sick person and mentally say, you are well. That's hypocrisy and ignorance and is really a lie. It is only with your inner spiritual discernment that you can look through the human appearance and see the divinely real, which underlies that appearance. So it isn't even a humanly mental process to become aware of perfection. Our work is becoming aware of perfection. But you can't do it humanly with your human mind, because nothing that your human mind will ever know will be perfect, not even humanly perfect. It's only when the human mind isn't working, when in the very stillness of your innermost being, when your soul senses are aroused, when your spiritual awareness is aroused, that you can behold the perfect man. That's why it's not a mental process. None of my thinking will add health to you. Again, we go back to Jesus. Who by taking thought can add a cubit to his stature? Who by taking thought can make a white hair black? Take no thought for your life. In other words, the humanly mental process has nothing to do with spiritual truth. And that, friends, is really the crux of this whole presentation I'm giving you. The human mental action has nothing to do with this particular approach. No amount of knowing the truth is going to help you. No amount of declaring the truth. No amount of any human no amount of any human mental process enters into this presentation. It is purely through the development of your spiritual consciousness. It's through the development of the soul sense. When you are in meditation, giving a treatment as we call it, when you are still sitting back with that listening ear, this inner thing comes to life and it shows you inwardly spiritual perfection. And that outwardly becomes interpreted as a healthy or sane or wealthy human being. You see, right there is the meat of my whole presentation, that we are not indulging any mental process for self-improvement. That's where we get away from the entire metaphysical field. It is a question of developing your spiritual sense so that ultimately you get to where Jesus was when he could look back at the cripple and say, pick up thy bed and walk. What do you think would enable a man to say that? Any mental process you can discover that would instantaneously raise up a crippled man so he could walk? No. If it weren't the very divine fire within, if it weren't the very Spirit of God, well, he couldn't do that. You might sit down and give the man a year's treatment and gradually turn him from a cripple into a healthy man by mental manipulation and by pounding and pounding and pounding. But you could not instantaneously do that. That's the fire of God in you which does it. And that's the point that we make here. We must make love the dominating influence in our experience. We must make all of the divine qualities of the Christ active in us. We must give up all personal desires, hate, envy, criticism, condemnation. We can't indulge those human qualities. We must not fear, for then we are just missing the opportunity to bring forth the divine qualities of Christ. Why go around indulging these human things at the expense of cheating ourselves of having the mind that was in Christ Jesus? When you have the mind that was in Christ Jesus, you don't have to do any reasoning or thinking with it. It's not a reasoning process. It's not a thinking process. It's not even an improving process. It is just looking out and saying, why, pick up your bed and walk. You might add, what's to hinder you? Is there any power apart from God? Now, you and I could sit here and say, there's no power apart from God. We could say it and say it and say it, and nothing would happen. But as a matter of fact, there is no power apart from God. And if we could just get the spiritual feel of that, we'd all go out on air. It was brought out before that a teacher can just sit and talk these truths from now until doomsday and not bring out spirituality in their class or congregation. It's like ministers in the pulpit who preach the most beautiful sermons, and yet the people in their audiences go on being the same kind of human being year after year in, year out, with just as many sicknesses, just as many crimes, just as much cheating on business, just as much cheating in politics. Why aren't the congregations in these churches all spiritually improved? For the simple reason that they are getting the letter of the truth. And many times are getting it from a very good human up there too. But that person or minister hasn't developed the Christ consciousness, the spiritual sense. A thing is not to criticize the human faults, but to lift them up to where they aren't human anymore. You can't do that with human reason. You can't tell a person not to steal. You can't tell a person not to lie or cheat. You can tell them all you want, perhaps, and probably have, but it doesn't do any good. The only thing that does good is you're touching them through the Spirit. You must attain to such a degree of spirituality that when you meet a sinner, he loses all desire to sin. That's when you are functioning as a spiritual teacher. That is your part of the work. It isn't really touching class as a lot of new truths and a lot of new mental processes. It is to give the age-old truth that has been tried and found wonderful. Found so by Elisha and Elijah and Isaiah and Jesus and John. The simple little old truths can all be summed up in less than 1,000 words, and then through developing our own spiritual qualities, we bring out spirituality in those we meet. Question: why did God take us down into Egypt, so-called? Answer: the question is, why does God take us down into Egypt to bring us to this? Knowing that God isn't a person sitting around manipulating the world, we know that he is our very own consciousness. God is forever imparting its truths and its guidance to us, but we are not always listening. So we take a roundabout way. It isn't God that is sending us roundabout. It is we who are doing it. God is always right there imparting his impulses until ultimately we get back. Then we say, my very going down into Egypt was responsible for my later becoming prince of this country. In other words, had I not had that experience, I would not have learned the lesson involved and heard the voice and come back. It isn't really that there was a God who made the brothers sell Joseph, but there was undoubtedly a state of consciousness of Joseph, which meant that ultimately he was to be the king's right-hand man. He was fitted for it. That was his divine consciousness. And some way he had to be brought to the proper place, even though he himself could not come gradually to it. It was always there, pulling and pulling, until ultimately he did land there. You may remember this sentence in Mrs. Eddy's writing. We come through suffering or science, which means we come through suffering or knowledge, understanding. She did not necessarily mean you come through Christian Science. Well, now that's true. You could take all that I've said here in these 2 weeks and immediately start to put it into practice, and gradually, through that understanding, come out into perfect harmony. Or you can say, yes, I'll do as much of it as I can, but I must indulge this bit of humanhood today, or I must indulge this. Now, you get there ultimately, but you come with a lot of suffering, and that's the way it is with all of us. For instance, we could take a stand right now that all that the Father hath is mine, and never again do I have to take thought for supply. We could take that stand right now and demonstrate it, but most of us won't. Most of us are going to still be a little bit worried about next month's bills, and we're going to take thought about this or that or the other thing. And to the degree that we take thought, we are violating our understanding, aren't we? To that degree, then, there will have been a period of suffering, though we do ultimately get there. And that's what happened to Joseph. Had he been attuned, he could just as well have said, I think I'll move to Egypt. But he didn't. He thought that he was going to stay with his father and his brethren. So he had to get picked up and kicked into Egypt. And when he was in the household, he could just as well have said to himself, I'm going to live as pure spiritual being and never let mortality enter my thought. But he didn't. The chances are that he liked Potiphar's wife and thought, well, what's the harm? So he had to go down into prison and there learn that the indulgences of any form of mortality has no place in a spiritual being's experience. So when he was in prison, all he had time for was to think, and that's when he finally came to the realization, well, if I'm spiritual, I guess I'd better act like it. It doesn't take the very depths sometimes of human experience to bring us to an awareness where we are willing to let the spiritual light gleam. Question. Mr. Goldsmith, I'd like to ask if you can explain an experience that came to me a couple of years ago. I've been wondering about it. I was asked to go to a seminary where there was a very sick man. When I got there, I saw a man lying in bed, perfectly motionless. I did not know why I did it, but I began with the first chapter of Genesis and explained to him the perfection of God's creation. Then I went on with the other chapters in a way I'd never done before and quickly showed him that was man's misapprehension of what God had done. I was there just 3/4 of an hour without asking any questions. I got up and said, can you accept what I've said? He said, yes, I can. I've often pondered the problem of good and evil and have written along that line. The man who had taken me there said, work for him a couple of days. I don't remember how I worked or anything else, but the man who had come for me visited me with his wife and spent the evening with me. And I said, I never thought to ask you what was the matter with that man, but from his state of immobility, I got the sense it was something to do with his getting about. The man laughed. He was going to the hospital the next day. The doctor said he was paralyzed and might never walk again. Answer. It had to do with your receptivity to truth, which is the highest form of metaphysical treatment or work there is. When we start working mentally and then call it God healing, it's just ludicrous. But when we get a state of receptivity so that when any case comes, this ear is open and the impartation comes like a flash, telling you how to work or what to work or what truth to reveal, and then you can call it God healing. Then you think that was God healing? Question. There's no question about it because it came to you without any thought process. It was not conscious thinking. It was a state of receptivity which revealed that truth to you. I call that being God divinely led. It did not consist in sitting down and giving a treatment against a disease or a condition. I don't believe in those treatments. Turn to God and turn to God and let God show you. Say, what is the need of this moment? Can you imagine what a man wrongly imprisoned would feel if I said, there is no injustice, man is perfect? He would have thrown it back at me. But the minute one is led to show him, say, the book of Genesis, then he could commence to get the idea of what the spiritual sense of forgiveness is. Forgiveness does not mean saying to Adolf Hitler, go on, what you did is perfectly all right. It isn't that at all. The higher sense of forgiveness is looking through the human activity and seeing that there at the center of his being sits God, which at the moment he is misinterpreting. So I say this, in all cases of treatment, and certainly I religiously follow this, never do I permit myself to think a thought, even to make a denial, or to affirm a truth, or to think a thought. I sit down when necessary and take the attitude. Speak, Father, for thy servant heareth. I will listen for thy voice. Be still and know that I am God. Let the imparting voice come in. Take the attitude that this is God's universe. Let God do something about it. Let us be witnesses to watching God in action. Then usually we are led to say the right thing or think the right thing or do the right thing. That's how all these letters came to be in existence that have been out these many years. Whenever I had letters from people out of town asking for help, no matter what the problem was, I would sit down and turn within and let the Father speak. Then I would sit down and write a letter on the problem, because we are dealing mostly with Christian Science. I might take a quotation either from Science and Health or one of Mrs. Eddy's writings and then build the letter around it. But I always exemplified a particular point of what we call truth. To take the attitude that I can give a treatment, no. You see what I mean? That is the approach to this. The more you live with this receptivity, the more you live and develop this receptive ear, the more the divine voice will speak to you, and at every point and at every call. Sometimes, too, it does not come in words. Really, Jesus' words are literally true when he said, I can of my own self do nothing. When I speak of myself, I speak a lie. My doctrine is not mine. That is our attitude, and I don't care whether Jesus said it or not. It's true. You cannot, as a human being, ever have enough power even to meet a simple cold. It has to be that divine impulse. It has to be that thing we call God or the Christ. The only way you can bring that to bear on a case is when you set your human thinking aside and sit there and become the vehicle for the activity of Christ. Then the right words come. the right thoughts come, or the right feeling comes. I've seen that with so many different kinds of cases that if I could just be receptive enough, the answer would come on the first visit. We'd have instantaneous results. But in other cases, one has to make a second or third visit. Sometimes it takes 2 years or 3 years. It all depends on the situation. I've had cases that have been long drawn out and which took lots of patience and lots of work. I've had cases where in the beginning, I've had as many as 10 and 15 and 20 telephone calls in a 24-hour period, insistent calls. And then I would watch them gradually going down to 10, 5, and 2, and then 1 every other day, and so on. The process was always the same. Always let Christ do the work. Let this inner infinite thing we call the Christ, the Comforter, the Holy Ghost, the Spirit of Truth, let it do the work. And not try to make of ourselves mental workers with mental processes or treatments. While these probably do work for some people and do work on certain levels of thought, it's not the approach for us. Any of the things I have said tonight should not be taken in spirit of criticism or condemnation or judgment. It is to be taken from the viewpoint that these activities have nothing to do with this particular approach of ours. And I do believe this approach will give you the greatest returns. The work has spread the way it has just because the results do come, and they come because the infinite thing which dispels the illusion. Question: can we all develop this receptivity? Answer: yes. It is only a matter of development. We all can develop it. It is a matter of desire and of faithfulness to it. It is, though, a major work. We must devote our lives to it. Give up everything of a distracting nature, everything of a material nature, everything of an interfering nature, and put your whole life into this thing. This is not something that can be accomplished by the simple desire to do it. Don't expect this to be just a course of lectures. As I said in the beginning, where you sit comfortably back. The intent of these classes is to shake you from head to foot out of your human peace into an activity which makes that shakeup welcome. If it does that, then from then on, it is really work. It means giving up loads of time and maybe money. It is really something that you put everything into, if it is to be worth anything. This is actually the Christ, living the spiritual life. It is getting to that place where Christ liveth in me. If that is desirable to you, you've got to work for it. Going from a human being to a spiritual being is not done in one bound. Even Saul of Tarsus had sought the truth for years and years and years under a Hebrew teacher. He was going in the wrong direction, but his heart was right. He was seeking God. No matter how erroneously he made his way, his purpose was truth. And ultimately, all of that was wiped away from him in one blinding flash, and he saw the Christ. So with us, it does not matter what path we've been on. It doesn't make any difference what we do from now on. What really counts is the degree of earnestness with which we are seeking truth. Can we agree that we are no longer seeking a demonstration of things, but are seeking the consciousness of the presence of God and a willingness to let the things be added? In that earnestness, we will develop. That is why on this path, I have said there are 3 very necessary things. One is a teacher who has caught some measure of it and who can keep listening and listening and guiding and guiding. Second is inspirational reading, metaphysical reading, scriptural reading, but only that which appeals to your own path, not because the reading is good for somebody else, but the reading that is good for you. Third, taking the opportunities to gather in groups of people who, like ourselves here, have not a selfish motive. All we come for is to hear about God. There isn't anything else. Some of us want that knowledge to become better or to get healthier or wealthier or happier. That isn't wrong either. That is a right desire. The main thing is that we are here mainly for God and truth, and therefore there must be an atmosphere of purity in this room that you can find only in places like this. So every time you go to a metaphysical meeting or a church meeting, you are being with people whose main purpose is seeking God. No matter on which path they move, you can get a feeling of meditation and peace and the Christ in any church, and you can be happy with groups of people of any faith. The main thing is to be among people who love God and truth and are seeking it in some way. In the end, if the desire is for God, they will have God. There's no greater example of that than Saul of Tarsus, who became St. Paul. Thank you and good night. Thank you, Joel. And with that, let us all find that peace within the I am, the I, as we rest. I am that I am.